Now, you're joining me from El Salvador, where you've made the effort to try and go to CICOT to try and get a status report, an update on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Can you give an update as to where you stand right now in terms of what you've been able to accomplish?
Yes. I tried to visit CICOT this morning. This is the notorious prison in El Salvador to which Kilmar Abrego Garcia was illegally abducted and put into. And I wanted to go check on his health, his well-being. So this morning, I drove to CICOT, but about 3 kilometers out from the prison. Was pulled over on the side of the road by soldiers who told me they'd been ordered not to allow me to continue on to the prison to visit Kilmar.
What goes through your head when you're getting pulled over by soldiers in El Salvador, in a country where clearly, due process isn't some major concern, and clearly they have no qualms about putting people into, a high security prison, even though they've been charged or convicted with no crime?
Well, you're right. I didn't really know what to expect. And so there was a lot of uncertainty about it. Clearly, they got wind that I planned to come. And so they had this checkpoint that was well outside the perimeter. I was there with some others, including the lawyer who represents Kilmar's mother and his wife, and a other group of us. So we talked with the soldiers, and they just repeatedly said that they'd been ordered not to allow us. I asked if they could let me know what the condition of Kilmar Abrego Garcia was, and they said they didn't know what his condition. The issue here, Brian, is nobody, and I mean nobody from the outside, has had any communication with him since he was illegally abducted by the Trump administration and sent to this prison. Not his wife, not his mother, not his lawyers. So I was trying to at least set eyes on him to see what his situation was. And as I said, I was stopped at this roadblock and turned away.
Senator, there is Trump saying that there's nothing he could do, that his hands are tied because, he now he's under the sovereign jurisdiction of El Salvador. And then you've got the reality of the situation, which is that the U.S. is actually paying to house these people in CICOT. And so how do you reconcile these two things where it's clear that the only reason he's there is because the United States, through our taxpayer dollars, are paying for him to be there, and yet at the same time, the Trump administration is pretending that it's got no agency in all of this?
Well, you put your finger right on the crux of the issue here, right? I mean, the Trump administration is clearly ignoring court orders to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia. I asked the embassy here if they'd received any instructions from Washington to help facilitate his release. The answer was no, they haven't. And the Fourth Circuit today issued a very strong and important decision backing up the district court, where the court said it was, quote, shocking that the administration would take the position that, having violated his due process rights and sent him out of the country to this prison, that they wouldn't be able to get him back. And on the El Salvadorian side, I made the point to the vice president of El Salvador yesterday that they really need to let him out of the prison, because right now they are complicit, absolutely complicit, in this illegal abduction scheme that has been hatched by the Trump administration. So we just need to keep pressure on both sides, keep speaking out. I made it clear to everybody here, I may be the first senator or first member of Congress here. I'm sure there will be others.
Is there any concern that the Trump administration isn't going to be willing to even acquiesce to the ruling that was handed down by the Supreme Court, by the federal district court, and now reaffirmed by the Fourth Circuit panel, because he views this as a broader broader metaphor for his immigration fight. And so he knows that if he capitulates even an inch here, then it's going to be viewed as weakness on the broader immigration topic. And so for that reason, he's just going to continue to abide by this Roy Cohn mentality where he doesn't even give an inch despite what the courts say.
So, yes, he may well try to continue to defy the court orders, right? Now they're trying to hang on this very thin read of their interpretation, although they admit that they have to facilitate the effort, but it's clear from the facts that they're not doing anything to implement that right now. So this is why we also have to make sure that we put pressure on from every angle. I will say, and you made this point at the beginning, the Trump administration is planning to use $15 million of American taxpayer money in order to pay El Salvador to keep Kilmar in prison, even though the U.S. courts have found that he's been illegally abducted and detained. So I'm certainly not going to vote for one penny for that purpose. And the appropriations process going forward this year will be an opportunity to talk about this. But we need to keep the spotlight on this. You know, El Salvador right now is in violation of international law that requires that lawyers be able to communicate with people who've been locked up. And that's when even when they're convicted criminals. In this case, they haven't brought any criminal charges against him. So you're right about the Trump administration's goal. They want to conflate this with their overall immigration policy. I think we need to be very clear as to what this is about. This is about protecting due process. And if you don't protect the due process of this individual, then you can forget about the due process rights of everybody else who resides in America. Because what bullies and authoritarians do is they pick on the weak link first. But this would just open the door, as it's already been open, but this would open the floodgates to tyranny in America.
Right. And we don't even have to guess, by the way, because we saw Trump discuss with President Bukele of El Salvador in the Oval Office that homegrowns are next, meaning he is open to and looking forward to sending American citizens to these foreign gulags somewhere, wherever he can find a willing partner. So again, this isn't even conjecture. This is him. This is us just abiding by his own words, listening to what he is saying in broad daylight. In terms of keeping the spotlight on this, I know that there have been some rumblings from your colleagues in the Senate and also Democratic members of the House about also going to El Salvador. Do you have any indication as to whether some of those folks are going to join you there and add to the chorus of voices who are pushing for his return?
I do believe others are planning to come. I've talked to them. I don't know their exact timing, and I'll let them announce their plans. But I told the vice president of El Salvador very directly that I expect more people to come, and it puts El Salvador in this untenable position to say the reason they're illegally keeping this person, Kilmar, in their prison is simply because they're being paid off by the Trump administration. And I don't think that's a good look for El Salvador. Now, the president of El Salvador might not care about this at this moment, but my view is if we keep the pressure on, it will.
And I also have to ask, just because this seems like the obvious question here, but are you safe by virtue of being there?
I believe I'm safe. I appreciate the efforts of the security folks at the American embassy, and we're taking all the necessary precautions. But as you indicated at the beginning, I mean, there is some risk to this, but I do think this is a moment where all of us need to take some risks to protect our due process rights, to protect the Constitution. And the Fourth Circuit, and I urge every American to read that decision today, really put this squarely on the line. They said the Trump administration is violating the due process clause of the Constitution, which goes to the heart and foundation of our constitutional rights and architecture.
And I just got to ask about that real quick, because we had the Supreme Court rule unanimously for the release of Garcia. Then that gets kicked back to the district court to be able to facilitate that release. Trump appeals that up to the Fourth Circuit panel. They agree with both the Supreme Court and the federal district court. And so there's nowhere else for Trump to go now. And so what happens here? I mean, is this pretty much the Trump administration getting ready to tee up a true legal constitutional crisis where there is no other avenue to appeal? Because if you appeal from the Fourth Circuit back up to the Supreme Court's not going to change their mind. They've already spoken on this issue. And so this is a moment where we either have to recognize that we have an executive branch that is bound by legal rulings that have been handed down by the Supreme Court, or we have an executive branch that views itself as above these rulings that are handed down by the Supreme Court.
Well, that's right. Look, it's possible the Trump administration will appeal the Fourth Circuit ruling, because what Judge Zinnes just did was she said to the administration, the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0 that you have an obligation to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia. It's pretty clear they're not doing that. And so what she did was begin to order depositions, right, where Trump administration's officials are going to have to testify under oath as to what they're doing to facilitate his return. Well, they don't like that. And so they appealed that decision to the Fourth Circuit. And the Fourth Circuit is now unanimously, the panel of the Fourth Circuit has backed up Judge Zinnes with very powerful language. So they may try to take it back to the Supreme Court, but after that 9-0 ruling, I don't see how the Supreme Court has any alternative but to back up the Fourth Circuit and the federal district court judge, because they are violating. I mean, the Trump administration is violating the due process rights of this individual. And that opens the door. That just opens the door to violating the due process rights of everyone who lives in America. So this is a very important moment for the future of our Constitution and for our country.
Well, perfectly put. We'll leave it there. Again, Senator, I just want to thank you on behalf of people who are watching right now, knowing that this moment requires big swings. This moment requires, like you said, putting your own safety at risk, and that's exactly what you're doing here. So we appreciate you doing that and meeting this moment with the urgency that it deserves. So we will, of course, stay on top of this story, but I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you. Thanks for checking in.